you kind of got to stay within the guardrails. And so I do think it's important for consumers to understand that, to know that, there are some products that meet emissions compliance. And
Today I'm going to be chatting with SEMA Garage, and I wanted to chat with them and ask questions about the process that they go through for getting parts on a truck and then testing them for 49 state or 50 state testing. And there's a lot of questions I've compiled over the last few months or 6 months or so from truck owners, from diesel shop owners that have questions about that process, what goes into it. So I'm really looking forward to being able to chat with them today. Before we get to it, we had a huge announcement recently where we've started our own apparel line, and it's not really related to the Diesel podcast. It's more so about t-shirts we'd want to wear, like what I'm wearing right now. So I'm really proud of the team at the Diesel podcast coming together, putting in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into being able to make this happen with designs, getting feedback, getting high quality shirts that that they last, they don't fade quickly. It's something you feel good wearing, so I'm really proud of them. If you go to ruggedthreadsco.com, we'll have a link down below to make it easy to head on over there. Check it out. We've got a lot of great feedback from you guys so far with ideas and different things. We also appreciate the people who have ordered up some shirts, and we're really excited about it. Wanted to share it with you guys, so make sure you head on over and check it out. I also want to give a shout out to one of our sponsors that makes the Diesel Podcast possible. Kershaw Knives has been a longtime supporter of the podcast. We appreciate their support, and also they offer a 40% off MSRP code just for Diesel Podcast listeners. If you go to kershaw.kaiusa.com, use code TDP40, you get 40% off your order. They got a ton of choices for different opening mechanisms, blade steel, blade shape, handle designs, and a whole lineup designed to meet any budget. So if you're in the market, definitely make sure head on over and check them out. All right, let's get to today's podcast with SEMA Garage and talking about emissions testing aftermarket parts. Peter, welcome to the Diesel Podcast. Been looking forward to chatting with you for a while. I got a ton of questions lined up as it
cool.
pertains to SEMA, truck parts, emissions testing, parts testing. So look forward to learning from you today.
Great to be here with you, Patrick. I'm looking forward to it.
I wanted to start I was thinking about our conversation today, and I know a lot of our listeners, they're truck owners, they're enthusiasts, and they know of SEMA from the perspective of this huge event that happens in the fall, and we all look towards it, see what new things are coming out for our vehicles. But you guys do so much more now. So I wanted to ask you about like what you do at SEMA, what the focus is as you're working with aftermarket companies, and
Sure.
some of the services you guys provide.
Great. Yeah. So, yeah, everybody kind of knows about the SEMA show. You see it on TV, and, there's just a lot of media attention on the show. That is our big event for the year. We do that in November. It's in Las Vegas, Nevada. We pretty much take over the convention center there. It's been described as the largest car show in the world, the largest gathering of small businesses in the world. It's really a unique show, and for car enthusiasts, there's just a lot to absorb. But SEMA is a trade association. We represent the interests of the automotive aftermarket industry, and really our specific focus is on specialty equipment. SEMA stands for Specialty Equipment Market Association. So I always kind of describe it as it's everything for your vehicle that you don't need. It's the stuff that's used for customization. And so yeah, I mean, you can imagine that runs the gamut from engine modifications to bed covers, or side steps, wheels and tires. I mean, we really get a whole lot within that description. Um, we have about 7,000 members. Those are businesses that are within that space, that are making, selling, marketing, or even doing media on the products that are in this arena. And so there's about 7,000 members. Our industry brings about $337 billion into the U.S. economy. We know that from doing some research. Our industry employs about 1.3 million people. So it's really kind of a big deal. We really have a pretty dramatic impact on the economy, and on people's lives. Just kind of the nature of impacting employees and their families, and bringing livelihoods into to people. So and not only that, it's a fun industry. People that are in it is enjoy it, um, and and it's also, as big as the industry is, it's very much a family. Like, people who are car enthusiasts or truck enthusiasts, you see another truck enthusiast going down the road, you kind of know that, okay, he and I think a lot alike. Um, and when I look at our industry, I think about and look at kind of the diesel truck side of it. We're probably dealing with, when you go to the show, there's probably more trucks than there are passenger cars. And diesels are, a significant segment of the trucks that are there. So diesel has a significant footprint in the SEMA world.
Where did how did SEMA Garage come to be? Because I've heard some of the guests we've had, some of the shop owners or people who own companies and build product, they've talked about SEMA Garage on the podcast and how it fits into diesel. So I'm curious how the trade association and representing the interests of aftermarket companies and the whole
Yeah.
industry also came to include SEMA Garage and those type of services that you guys offer.
Okay, yeah. So SEMA's been around since the early 1960s. I think we celebrated our, what is that? We're going on 70 years or something now. Um, and um, the SEMA Garage. So throughout the years, we've done things like government advocacy. We have a Washington D.C. office that's kind of paying attention to the legislation that's coming. All this stuff with EV mandates and stuff. Man, our government office has been really paying close attention to that to make sure that our industry doesn't get hit or blindsided by laws that would really cripple us. So we've got advocacy that's been going on for the lifespan of SEMA. We've got the trade show that's been going on most of the time that SEMA has existed. But the SEMA Garage came about probably about 15 years ago, and the the real driving motivation behind the SEMA Garage was um, we need to kind of find ways to help our members develop their products. Now, a big piece of this was emissions regulations. I've worked in the industry for over 30 years, and dealing with the regulations is a big piece of just kind of making sure that your business remains profitable. You have to be able to ensure that your products are legal. So that gets into issues with the California Air Resources Board and EPA. I'm sure we'll talk about that here in a minute. But um, the SEMA Garage was really formed as a toolbox to help our members develop their products and get them all the way from a concept to being legal for sale. So it includes a number of different things. We have two locations that are SEMA garages. One is in Southern California. The second one is in Detroit. And in both of these locations, we have services where our members can come. They can use digital scanning equipment to scan vehicles, to scan their own prototype products. We can help one of our members do 3D printing to make rapid prototypes for their products, to test fit and things like that. We offer what we call measuring sessions. This is where SEMA gains access to vehicles before they even hit the showroom floors and they're on the street. And so our members can come see those vehicles. They can take their own measurements. They can start figuring out how their products are going to integrate with those vehicles. So all of that is kind of design and development. The section that I work in, I'm the director of emissions compliance. So my role and my department is to help our members go through the very complicated process of emissions compliance. And it really breaks down into two primary categories. One is we assist our members with the paperwork that's involved when dealing with both the California Air Resources Board, also known as CARB, and the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA. So we help with the paperwork. We help just navigate the processes. As you can imagine, these are both government agencies, so there's nothing simple or easy about dealing with them. There's a lot of paperwork involved and red tape and so forth. So our staff will help our members kind of go through those processes. And then the other side of it is once you kind of have worked through the process with the agency, you're going to come out the other side with most likely with a requirement to do some testing. And that testing has to be done in a very specific environment, a laboratory environment. Both of our garages are equipped with emissions laboratories, and so we assist our members through that process as well. It's a very specialized field, but because we have kind of the expertise, our goal is to help our members get through that process as easily as possible.
Where I think this all really comes together for an enthusiast or truck owner, somebody who likes to customize their truck or get a little bit more power, is I think back a long time ago, there would be, say a new truck model comes out, there's a shop, a fabricator out there, they see an issue with the truck and they just get to work. They, modify something, put it on the truck. Hey, it works. It makes more power. EGTs are lower. Hey, let's put it on the website and sell it. And it would just kind of work like that. But once we started to see emissions compliance start to really take a forefront in diesel, that was one of the main things I would hear from shop owners or just enthusiasts. They'd say, okay, well, how do these products get tested? I can't afford to get all the equipment myself. I don't know how to run it. I don't have this experience. And so when I heard of SEMA Garage and what you guys do, it really clicked for me as far as in 2024, how do you get a product to market? How do you make sure that you can sell it in 49 or 50 states and have that documentation, the laboratory environment, the testing data, so you can confidently say and show and prove, hey, this product doesn't affect emissions in a negative way or keeps it within these limits that it needs to be. So I see it as such a crucial part because it's changed the way product hits the market and what I can buy as a consumer on a website. You guys are involved in helping the aftermarket do that, and I think that's the future of it. Is every company I talk to, when I ask them, hey, what's new or what's coming up, they say, hey, well, we got these products that they're being tested, we got to go through the process. They're all doing it now, whereas before I'm not sure they had to or did. So I see the importance of it.
Yeah, it's the testing is very specialized when it comes to dealing with CARB and EPA. It's not like a smog check. There's here, especially here, I'm in California, but here in California, we deal with smog check. And even with diesels used to be exempt from that program, but now, we got to take our diesel trucks in and they get inspected and they do certain things to validate whether they're, meeting the emissions criteria. The testing we're talking about is a very different form of testing. It's actually the same format of testing that the OEMs do to demonstrate compliance. So even when you hear about like these OEMs that have gotten popped for violations, the things that the violations that are occurring are centered around this very specific testing that it's the same testing that we're doing in the aftermarket. There's about a dozen or so laboratories nationwide that are capable of doing this kind of testing, but realistically, we're the only ones that specialize in that kind of test. We're the only ones that specialize in the aftermarket and really assisting the aftermarket through that process. A lot of those labs are set up to help OEMs with their testing. So we really kind of fill a niche that's very important. Now, I mean, this testing is a truck owner would never have to really go through this on their own. It's very different and specialized. It is expensive. So that's why, we want to make sure when we're assisting our members through that process that we're helping them, get through it as smoothly as possible. We kind of know the ins and outs of it so that we can guide them through that process and hopefully get them out the other end with as low a cost as possible. When you're dealing with emissions compliance from a consumer perspective, there's really the main thing to know is that a product, in order to be legal for sale, it has to have gone through, if it's an emissions related product, it has to go through some level of demonstration. It's really the manufacturer's responsibility to do that. And the way we handle this is there's documentation that will represent the fact that that product has been tested. And that documentation can either result in that product being legal in 49 states, which basically means it meets the EPA's requirements, or it would be legal in all 50 states, which basically means it meets the California Air Resources Board requirements. In California, the California Air Resources Board runs a program for aftermarket products, and when you as a manufacturer go through that program, at the end of that process, you receive a document. It's called an executive order. You may have heard of like a CARBO.
Yeah.
That's what that means. So that document says this product is legal for use on this range of vehicles because it's demonstrated compliance. And once you have that CARBO, you're legal in all 50 states because EPA does recognize that recognize the CARBO as an appropriate demonstration of emissions compliance. Now, in a situation where maybe you don't want to go through the CARB process for one reason or another, and there's a handful of reasons that might exist. You can meet the EPA requirements, but again, EPA doesn't have a program like CARB does. So one of the things we've done, SEMA has done, is we've developed our own program. We call it SEMA Certified, and you can take your product through that SEMA Certified process and have similar documentation to a CARBO. At the end of that process, you can demonstrate to anybody that would ask that product meets the EPA's requirements. So those are the two documents that kind of can validate that a product is emissions legal.
I have so many questions to ask you right there. I gotta get control of myself here and ask them, in an order. But as far as if I was going to try to understand CARB and EPA testing, would it be correct for me to say that CARB testing is more strict than what would be EPA testing or validation?
I would actually say that's probably not the case. The testing for both agencies is pretty much the same. I think where the differences are is that because CARB has a very rigid set of procedures, it can become very challenging just from a paperwork standpoint to go through that process. So oftentimes the testing we do for SEMA Certified is pretty much identical to what we do for CARB, but we can offer a greater range of coverage with a single set of testing. With CARB, you wind up having to do paperwork multiple times to kind of get that same amount of coverage. You may not have to test multiple times, but the paperwork is really what bogs things down. So we try to make sure that the testing that we do on SEMA Certified can actually be leveraged for CARB as well. So you could basically go through our process, get a SEMA cert, and then take that same test data and submit it to CARB, and then get your CARBO. So we encourage some of our members to follow a path like that.
Okay, that's really helpful because a lot of questions or confusion that I find with truck owners is they'll say, well, what's the difference between 50 and 49 state legal? Is it stricter on the California side? So I think understanding that the testing is either identical or very similar helps to understand why it's a little bit different. And then that product may in the future go from 49 to 50 state, depending on the product and the company and if they're going to pursue that. One of the other misconceptions that I found is a truck owner might think, let's just take tuning, for example. And it's a newer truck with a DPF, EGR, SER, all that stuff. And they might be online poking around and they see tunes for sale. And you don't have to take anything off the truck. You leave everything on, but they think, okay, well, I'm not taking the DPF or EGR off. This tune will work with it. I should be fine. I wanted to kind of go a little bit deeper on the testing. So when, say, a company approaches you guys and says, hey, I want to get 50 state emissions on tuning, what is different about that versus a tune out there that doesn't do that, and they're leaving the DPF and EGR, and from a procedural standpoint, and also, I guess it eventually can turn into a legal standpoint that the company might face if they haven't done any of this testing, if they don't have any data to say we're within these parameters.
Yeah, it's a great question. There are plenty of products that don't go through an emissions compliance process and assume that because they're leaving the emissions equipment on the vehicle that product is legal. The reality of emissions compliance is what we're doing is we're testing a vehicle against a standard. So what I mean by that is whenever a truck is sold, when an OEM develops a truck, um, that truck has to conform to a standard. It has to be you measure what comes out the tailpipe, and there's a set standard, and it has to be below the standard. And so all the OEMs have to meet that criteria. The same is true with aftermarket products. So what we do is when we're testing a product, the product's on the vehicle, we have it on a chassis dynamometer. It's a very specialized chassis dynamometer, and we're running tests that are simulating road conditions. So we're not running it at wide open throttle, measuring the horsepower output. We're doing road simulations. We're simulating city driving conditions. We're simulating highway driving conditions. We're simulating loaded, sometimes loaded conditions. Some of the tests include a cold start. So there's all these variations on how a vehicle would operate in the real world. And under each of those sets of conditions, we're measuring everything that's coming out of the tailpipe. And when we get done with the test, there's that standard. We have to be below that standard. And so in a situation where, a product hasn't been tested, you really don't know where it lands.
Yeah.
And the reality is that most custom tuning that's going on, most of the tuning that's out in the world, what are we tuning for? We're tuning for horsepower and fuel economy, right? Those are the things that we're going to improve. We have no idea what's happened to the emissions in that process. So there are limitations on what you can do. You got to be careful about how you tune in order to achieve that. I'm sure some of your other guests have talked about that. There's you kind of got to stay within the guardrails. And so I do think it's important for consumers to understand that, to know that, there are some products that meet emissions compliance. And in most cases, you're going to know that because they've done the documentation, they've done the testing, they've got documentation that shows that. And then it's being sold as a street legal product, either a 49 state legal or a 50 state legal.
Common question we get from you guys a lot is, hey, I need a diesel engine. I can't wait this long to get one, or normal place I get stuff from it just takes too long, or they don't have the parts in it that I need. Maybe my truck's not stock, or I tow heavy with it. I don't want to go back with just a stock engine. DFC Diesel is a sponsor of the podcast. We worked with them, hand in hand on doing episodes, answering technical questions. They have a complete lineup of Cummins, Duramax, and Powerstroke remanufactured engines that are set to a standard of ISO 9001 2015 standards, which is a huge deal in the aftermarket. And there's certain levels of quality testing, validation that are required for that. So when you get one of those engines, the type of quality that's built behind it, with an industry-leading warranty that's really comprehensive. And the other thing with that is, sometimes the options that are out there, it's a basic OEM engine. You want a little bit more. You don't want to have the same failure again. So there's a bunch of different series of engines that they have, from core, street, tow haul, and also the Speed of Air series, which we've covered on the podcast before. There's a lot of really cool benefits to it. And if you have questions about that, reach out to them. If you don't know the type of engine that you're looking for, if you go to dfcdiesel.com, there's a ton of info there. You can send an email or you can reach out to them. Also, they're working with Speed of Air pistons, which it's the only piston that pays for itself. And there's a lot of really cool technology behind it. So you can add that into your build and be able to get better fuel economy, increase power, increase torque, and better engine life out of it. Some of the most common engine applications or series of engines that they have with that lead time, a lot of them are in stock or they have really short lead times. So you can check your favorite retailer or go to dfcdiesel.com, check them out, see what's in stock, see what you can get. If you have questions, maybe you want to do something that's outside of the normal series of engines, they have tons of choices for rods, cranks, pistons, valve train upgrades, tons of different things. So if you're in the market, definitely make sure and head on over and check them out. Yeah, and I think too, as far as emissions testing for the truck user, the end user, the consumer, we're seeing that more in different parts of the country than it may have existed. Colorado, it used to be either none or then became a snap test, and then these states are looking towards California and say, well, what do you guys do? Right. Oh, there's this carb number that's on the part, so when you go do the smog test, the technician can look and see, okay, there's an EO number on it. But I wanted to ask you about the driving conditions, because I think we tend to think, okay, well, All the stock parts are on the vehicle. Um, when you guys are comparing it, or when you're doing the testing, are the OEMs held to a standard where they want to see emissions on a cold start? They want to see it at a certain throttle position. They want to see it with a certain amount of weight behind it. So when somebody in the aftermarket's looking to make a product, you have to test it against these OEM standards that the EPA wanted to see, and Ford or Ram or GM had to meet for this new truck.
Yeah, so there's a suite of tests. It's either 4 or 5 different what I call drive traces that are typically required. And like I said, they're each simulating different types of road conditions. If you want to look this up, there's actually some pretty good information on Wikipedia about this. But if you type in Wikipedia FTP-75, so FTP stands for Federal Test Procedure. And there's variations of that, but the FTP 75 is kind of the main backbone test that everybody, all the OEMs always have to perform. And in that article on Wikipedia, you'll see references to a few of the other tests as well. But the FTP 75, it's a mild test in terms of the load on the vehicle. You're basically simulating city driving. It never exceeds about 52 to 55 miles an hour. It does include a cold start. So when we run an FTP 75, the vehicle has been kept in a controlled environment for 12 to 36 hours prior to the test. So basically, that vehicle's at room temperature. There's no temperature in the exhaust. Everything's, we call it cold, but it's essentially around 70 degrees. And so when you start the vehicle, because the catalyst and the DPF, nothing's warmed up yet, you're going to get a little bit of emissions passing through under that cold start condition. We usually see it takes about somewhere between 1 to 3 minutes for that after treatment, the catalyst and everything else to warm up to the point where it's operational. So cold start is a pretty critical element. That's where some of the that's actually where most of the emissions that modern vehicles produce are occurring, is during that first couple of minutes of operation. But then you're simulating city driving. So you accelerate the vehicle slightly, then you come back down to a stop, then you accelerate and stop. And it's just a lot of stopping and starting. It's kind of like, the way I describe it is, it's like you got in your vehicle in the morning, you started it up, you backed out of your driveway, drove down the street to your first stop sign there. You sit there, you wait for traffic, then you go again, and then you maybe you get on maybe a main artery and you're driving a little ways, but then you hit a stoplight. And then you get to the donut shop and you stop and get out and you shut the engine off. And so this test includes a 10-minute hot soak. So after we've run for I don't know, I think it's about 10 minutes or so, we get out, shut the engine off, and then it sits for 10 minutes, and then you restart the engine, and then we have a hot start phase. So ultimately, that test is divided into these 3 phases that's simulating all these road conditions. Then we have these other tests that are all hot start tests, meaning we don't have to worry about the cold start phase anymore. But these are more aggressive tests where you're simulating highway conditions. There's a highway fuel economy test. There's one called the USO6. The USO6 is the most aggressive of any of the tests that we run. It gets up to about 80 miles an hour and simulates some rapid acceleration, maybe passing a vehicle on the highway, that kind of thing. And then there's one test, but by the way, all of these tests are run with the air conditioning in the vehicle inactive. But a few years back, the EPA discovered that some of the OEMs were cheating by if the air conditioning in the vehicle was active, then the vehicle would run differently, run a different set of calibrations. So they added a test where you have the air conditioning active in the vehicle. Okay. And so there's all these little variations on these tests, and they're all simulating these different road conditions. None of these tests, for the most part, are ever going to put a vehicle to wide open throttle. Usually we see 2/3 to 3/4 throttle is about the maximum that you'll actually push the vehicle. But and if you ever get a chance to observe one of these tests, I think it's really interesting. I think people would be intrigued to see kind of how these things are measured.
Yeah, well, it's really tough to understand when we're looking for truck parts or we're thinking about upgrading our vehicle, it's tough to understand the whole process that companies have to go through, and then what you
Yeah.
guys do to help them. So I was really excited to do this episode. When I think of emissions testing, the first thing I think of is tuning, and then I start to get into hard parts like turbo injectors,
Yeah.
injection pump. But how far does this go with validating something? Does it go into something like a transmission tune? Does it go into gears? Does it go into maybe even ride height of the vehicle and tires? Like
Yeah.
how far does it go, and what do SEMA members ask for?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it kind of depends on who you ask. If you ask CARB, their answer is gonna be that, there's a lot more included in the testing, in what would require testing than maybe EPA would say, or even what I think is appropriate. Um, but generally speaking, the way we approach this is, if any product that would impact the airflow through the engine, the fuel delivery in the engine, the tuning, the tuning of the engine, those are all products that would have to go through some level of demonstration. Now, it doesn't mean everything has to be tested. Some things can be evaluated under what we call engineering evaluation, where you can, on paper, you can demonstrate that this product won't impact emissions because it's not it just doesn't have a dramatic impact in any significant way. But if it impacts anything related to the engine performance, then it's going to have to go through some level of demonstration. Um, you mentioned wheels and tires and lift kits and things like that. That gets into an area that we really don't touch. It doesn't mean that those things don't impact fuel economy, but I think both the agencies, CARB and EPA, both, they kind of understand, there's a lot that happens to a vehicle once it gets out, off the showroom floor and out into the real world.
Yeah.
And they just can't control all of that. I mean, when you think about oversized tires, for example, I mean, you're putting additional load to the rear wheels, but you do the same if you put three people in the car, or you're towing a trailer, those kinds of things. So, like I said, there's a lot of things that you just can't pin down. And I think that's it's a fair demarcation to make, but we always focus on products that are having direct impact on engine performance.
Okay. I thought of another question. This would probably be more from the perspective of somebody in the industry, either a business owner, somebody that's making products, or maybe even a shop. How how would you approach it, or how does it need to be approached when we start to combine different products? Like, say there's a tuner, and then it also comes with a turbo, and
Yep.
maybe a set of injectors and an injection pump that have all gone through the testing. Can you
Yep.
just combine them all and you're good to go, or do you need to test them all together, or how does it work when we're doing multiple upgrades?
Yeah. Yeah. Technically, if they've all been tested separately and they all have their documentation, technically you can combine them, and yes, you are good to go. The way I approach it with our manufacturers is, it really depends on how you're going to sell the product. So if you're selling it as individual components, then you should do demonstrations of compliance individually. If you're selling it as a kit, where things are combined together, then that's how you should test it. So and that we coach our members through those processes to try to understand, okay, what's the best way to get the coverage that I'm seeking, without having to do too much testing, because testing can get expensive after a while. So we kind of coach them through those processes.
Yeah, I see that being a question in the future, because we're starting to see more of these products that have gone through testing,
Yeah.
with injectors and turbos and tunes and just different things that are out there. And so we're seeing kind of this resurgence, I guess, maybe that's not the right word, but with newer trucks, where now you can go find turbo kits and you can find injectors and there's tunes. And for a while there wasn't, probably because companies were saying, okay, I need to test, I need to go through this process, we're gonna have to hold off on releasing it. Where now I can jump on a website that sells parts and I can find a lot of these things. So as
Right.
a truck owner, somebody who likes to not leave it stock, I see all these different upgrades
Yeah.
that I can do. So I think in the future that's probably something we're going to see more of, are kind of these packages or combination of parts.
I think from a consumer perspective, one of the most important things to think about when you're combining parts is the OBD system. So you have that check engine light on your dash. That's there for a reason. It's basically a system that monitors the emissions output of the vehicle. It makes sure that all the emissions equipment, all the functionalities in the engine are working correctly. So if you start putting stuff on your truck and all of a sudden you're getting a check engine light, that's a good indication that something's not happy. And somewhere along the line, a couple of products aren't agreeing with each other, and so that'd be a good way to know whether you've kind of gone beyond the limits.
How does it work for somebody? Say, let's just take a turbo. It's a company, they've designed this turbo for this new truck, and they know they need to do testing on it. How does the process work with you guys, and like reaching out to you? What do what should they expect? What should they maybe have done beforehand? What's kind of an overview of the process of taking my product to SEMA Garage and saying, "Hey guys, I want to get this out there on the market. What do I need to do?"
Yeah. The first thing I would say is you kind of got to know, okay, what's my fitment range? Is this going to fit 2019 to 2024? And are we talking, or is it going to fit, F250 and 350, maybe F450, 550? What's the range of fitment? So knowing that is important. When you come to us with that information, the first thing we're going to do is look at that range of vehicles. And out of that group of vehicles, we're going to try to pick what we call worst case. We want to do our demonstration, our testing demonstration on a vehicle out of that group that best represents that whole group. And you'd be surprised at like how much variation there is from the OEMs just in their own emission certification work. But we really want to pinpoint worst case, because that's when we do submit that data to CARB, that's what they're going to look for, is that, okay, you tested on a vehicle that was a proper representation to represent this whole group. So we pick worst case, and then essentially we'll take an appropriate test vehicle that meets that worst case criteria. The test vehicle, basically, I want that vehicle to be completely stock other than the product that we're testing. So I don't want oversized wheels and tires. I don't want, other modifications that have already been done to it. I want it to be stock. The other basic requirement is that vehicle should have at least 4,000 miles on the odometer. The reason for that is because 4,000 miles is kind of the window in which we know that everything is now seasoned and greened and everything's working. It's kind of doing its job on the vehicle, all the after treatment and various things on the vehicle. So that's kind of the main criteria. And then once we kind of get to that point, we can kind of outline what the testing requirements are going to be, and work it out to get them on the schedule in one of our two labs and go through the process.
So as far as the year ranges and the variants you mentioned, that's really interesting. I've never heard that before. So just as a hypothetical, say we have a 2019 to 2023 year range, and say the 2019 meets the EPA requirements for emissions, but it's just barely, or it's within this range. And maybe 2020, say Ford or GM, made a little bit of a change to the vehicle where now it's a little bit better. So you guys would look at that year range and say, if we can do this on a 2019, we know the 20, the 21, the 22 are going to be good. So let's focus on the 19.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So when we look at worst case, we're looking at, okay, which one is closest to the standard? Now, the thing to remember too, is I mentioned there's like, 4 different tests that we're running on these vehicles, but there's also, we're looking at multiple pollutants that are coming out of the tailpipe. We're looking at hydrocarbons, NOx, particulate matter, CO, carbon monoxide. So, even within, those, so you got these multiple tests, and you've got all these different pollutants coming out of the tailpipe, and each one of those has their own standard. So there's a lot of different factors to look at, but we look at all those numbers, and then we make that assessment for worst case.
When you look towards the future and things that the average truck owner is not going to be aware of, are there new standards that may be approaching, or changes or revisions that are happening on a federal level or say state level with California, where it could impact the testing of these products in the sense of, hey, things are going to get more strict. So if you're thinking about a product in the future, there's this change coming up. Is there anything like that on the horizon?
The standards do get tighter. About every 3 to 5 years, we'll see that the standards get tighter and tighter. I'm always amazed at the OEM's ability to not only meet those tighter standards, but increase horsepower as they go through.
Yeah.
Um, you know, back in 2007, we saw the introduction of DPFs. Around 2010, we saw, SCR come into play. And, there's probably going to be some new technologies, in the near future that'll increase clean, make the vehicles even cleaner at higher horsepower levels. You see things like EGR coolers, and there's just added technologies from year to year that the OEMs are experimenting with. They're probably learning now about how to employ those technologies to meet the future standards. I don't have a lot to say about like what might be coming, but I do expect that we'll see something. Just like we saw DPFs introduced for diesels, I do expect there will come a time when we'll see gas particulate filters on gasoline vehicles. They already have them in Europe. And that's really about, how tight the particulate standard is. As that standard gets tighter, the OEMs are going to have to engage new technologies to meet those standards as well. I own my daily driver's an LBZ, and I'm thankful for that truck every day because it's it's that cutoff point for before DPFs came about, and I'll hang on to that thing as long as I can.
I hear that a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah,
there's a lot of people that want to go back to the older ones, or they have a new one and
yeah,
think, well, I've always wanted that LBZ or that 5.9 or that 7.3, and they they pick one up. I wanted to touch on the gas stuff a little bit
sure.
from the perspective of, like, I know it's a diesel podcast. People are listening because they love diesel trucks, they own them. But whenever we talk about emissions and emissions compliance or enforcement, I see a lot of comments on YouTube where people will say, well, what about the gas world? Why is it just always focused on diesel?
Yeah.
Do you guys see both? Is the testing, the change in the aftermarket, just the same on the gas side as it is on diesels? I have a tendency to just focus in on diesel trucks,
Yeah.
but I wanted to kind of expand my horizon and understand the aftermarket as a whole. Is it going through the same process that diesel is, from testing
Yeah.
products, getting validation, that stuff?
From a testing standpoint, yes. I mean, we see, anytime you're developing, say, a supercharger, a set of headers, or a turbo, those are all things that are going to require compliance testing, just like on the diesel side. You know, the reality of, you mentioned enforcement, and we hear stories about enforcement on the diesel, in the diesel world. The reality of enforcement is that diesel has uh, a problem that gasoline doesn't, and that is that without emissions equipment, if you delete a DPF, the exhaust coming out of that tailpipe is visible,
Yeah, you see it.
and that's what puts a black mark on diesel, so to speak. Um, and when we really started seeing this, of course, once DPFs were introduced, then right after DPFs was DPF deletes, and so the agencies are out there looking at what's going on out in the world, and you start seeing videos of people rolling coal and things like that, and that just shines a spotlight on the industry. So I think that diesel has had a tougher go of it with in the enforcement environment because of the visibility of deletes. Um, I think it exists in the gasoline world too. I mean, any companies, realistically, when Carbon EPA, when they're looking to do enforcement, they're looking at what's out on the internet. They're looking at who's selling parts that don't have EOs and so forth, and so that could catch anything on either the gas side or the diesel side. Tuning in particular, there's a lot of concern over tuning for gasoline vehicles, because just like with diesels, because there's plenty of tuning going on out there that isn't going through compliance. So I think that catches the attention of the agencies as well. But the reality of the difference between diesel and gasoline is there's a lot more after treatment on a diesel. You have EGR, you have DPF, you have SCR, you have catalysts, you have so there's a whole lot more happening to keep that diesel clean than on a gasoline side. With gasoline, most of the emissions compliance or the emissions control work is being done in valve timing and a pair of catalysts, and that's pretty much it. So it's gasoline engines are much simpler in terms of meeting the requirements, meeting the standards than diesels these days. There's just a lot more technology involved with diesels.
Yeah, that side of the visibility, that's something I inadvertently just myself will pick up on when I'm driving around and I know this 0559 doesn't smoke that much stock, and you see it roll and you can see the reaction of people around. They hone in on it versus this Mustang or Camaro or something, which I don't know what it has done to it, but you focus in on that because of the visual aspect
Yeah,
of
for
it. And
sure.
I had seen something online about gas particulate filters, and people were chatting about that. So I was curious how they both relate, and I think that your answer definitely helps. I think a diesel enthusiast out there understand that it's industry wide. It's not just one group, but there's so much more involved in a diesel truck and what the emission standards are at this time, that it's very complex and
Yeah.
there's a lot that goes into it.
Surprisingly, with all of that technology, diesels can actually be cleaner at the tailpipe than their gasoline counterparts. Given same kind of load conditions and such, diesels are really clean with all their after treatment in place. It's just that it takes a lot of technology to get there.
Yeah, well, it seems like it has gotten there, because you think
Mhm.
back to that 2007 and a half year range, 2008 truck, and what the technology could afford those vehicles and some of the early problems. And you look at what power level they have now. The general consensus I've gotten from professionals in the industry is that they're better. The emission systems are better. The trucks make more power. There's more technology in them.
Yeah.
And it's been interesting to see that evolution from the early days till now. And they're always able to squeeze a little bit more power and torque. So you see the commercials on TV and on the internet
Yeah.
and everything's there.
It's pretty impressive.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, um, for a shop owner, a fabricator, company out there that's listening, and they're interested in working with you guys, what's the best way to reach out, to ask questions, and to be able to start this process for their own products?
Yeah. Uh, in terms of companies that are making products that need to go through some level of compliance, I would recommend visiting SEMAGarage.com. That's a great resource for the services that we offer, and there's ways to contact us on that website. But I'd take it one step further too, even for individual vehicle owners. Look, SEMA is constantly working, advocating for our industry, and the more common voices we have to help, just the louder we get, right? And the more that we're able to share common cause, the more effect that we have, especially with government regulators. So I would encourage, we have an individual membership available as well. So even individual enthusiasts, those of you that are truck owners, you can become a SEMA member. And so that individual membership you can find out more about that on SEMA.org, SEMA.org. And that's just a great way to kind of join forces with not only the companies that you're buying products from, but other enthusiasts and people that care about this industry, and really protecting our rights as vehicle owners, and to right to modify those vehicles.
That's an excellent point. I'm glad that you brought up, because a lot of our YouTube feedback when we cover emissions, people will say, "Well, how do I get involved? How do I help? What can I do?" And for a
Yeah.
long time, I think as an automotive enthusiast, myself included, I didn't really get involved. I just kind of
Yeah.
sat back, and then I start to see all these things and these products disappear, and maybe this company that I used to buy parts from isn't around anymore, and I hear the stories and everything, and I just think, well, how can I help? What can I do? What can I participate in? And I know in other facets of the political scene, there's groups, and they represent you and fight for your rights. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that point,
Yeah, there's
because
strength in numbers for sure.
there is. Well, I appreciate your time today, Peter, and chatting with me, answering those questions, and helping us understand a bit more of what you guys do to help get these products out there so that these
I
companies
enjoyed
can
the
sell them.
time. I enjoyed the time, Patrick. Let's do it again sometime.
Oh yeah, it's definitely fun. Thanks again.
All right.
Don't forget, Diesel fans, make sure and head on over to kershaw.kaiusa.com. Use code TDP40 for 40% off MSRP. So if you're in the market for a knife, they got a ton of choices for different opening mechanisms, blade steel, blade shape, handle design, a whole lineup that is designed to really meet any budget. So if you're looking, something to take to work, having a toolbox, something for EDC, they've definitely got you covered. We appreciate their support. Also, we've just launched ruggedthreadsco.com, which is basically, we wanted to take a bunch of ideas, bunch of different designs that we'd want to wear on t-shirts ourselves. It's not really related to the Diesel podcast, but it's things that we're passionate about, whether it's the outdoors or just other things that are going on. And it's like a shirt I'm wearing today, you're going to see on other podcasts. We feel fortunate for the team that we have here at the Diesel Podcast and all the time and effort that they put in to be able to make this happen. I'm really proud of them. We're really excited to share it with you guys. We're going to have a link down below to ruggedthreadsco.com. You can check them out. Give us feedback. Let us know. We appreciate the people who have ordered so far. Had a lot of great suggestions. Or either other things you'd want these sayings on, these logos, these other statements, or just ideas in general. So you guys are awesome. We appreciate all your support, and we're really excited to be able to bring it to you guys. Also want to give a shout out to some of our Patreon supporters. Tyler Loewen at 23 Diesel, CUTTERUP Rob, J Cole, Colby, all of our other Patreon supporters, all of you who subscribe on YouTube and podcast apps, follow us on social media. We appreciate all your support here in year 8 of the Diesel Podcast, and look forward to bringing you more of the content that you want to hear in 2024. Till next time, keep the shiny side up.